Hey, with us now is Assistant Managing Editor at Red State, Jay Caruso. Jay, you visited North Georgia 5 months into Donald Trump's presidency, and you write about it in The Atlantic. You say this, quote, while Trump supporters want him to focus on the big picture issues such as health care and tax reform, the president spends most of his time consumed with the kind of trivialities other presidents leave for spokespeople to handle. Trump still sees his presidency as a brand to sell rather than a political office in which to shape the overall agenda for the country. That leaves leaders like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell in a bind. They worry about Trump alienating the swing voters some of their members will need to win re-election. But if they make their concerns public, Trump supporters may see it as an attempt to undermine the president. So they're left to perform a high-wire act of politics and personal persuasion, trying to rein in their president's excesses without alienating their own voters. Jay, it is great to have you on the show. And, well, this morning's a perfect example. He got into a tweet storm that certainly undercut his standing with the Supreme Court coming up.
Yeah, you know, this is the kind of thing that, you know, the people that I had spoken to in Cartersville probably don't care about too much. But, you know, here in D.C., it certainly is going to give him a lot of trouble with fellow, with people in Congress and people talking to, GOP leaders and even Democratic leaders. So, you know, that's going to be a problem.
And at what point? So we'll talk about the responses you got mainly when you went out and talked to people in, as you called it, the middle of Trump country. Yeah,
it's Bartow County where Trump carried, I think, something like 75% of the vote over Hillary Clinton. And interestingly enough, most of the people that I spoke to weren't like Trump supporters from the start. They had, they either had supported Ben Carson or it didn't matter. They were just going to vote for the Republican. But, the whole idea was that they weren't concerned so much about, the kind of insider DC politics things that a lot of us kind of cover on a day-to-day basis. They were just more concerned about, is he going to repeal Obamacare? Is he going to get tax reform passed? That's what they were concerned about.
Jay, Nick Confessori here. So I'm curious. I always, if I do reporting trips like the one that you were just on, I find that politics in the real world and the way people experience it are very divorced from politics as the way people in Washington experience it. And I wonder what you learned about what's actually important and what actually breaks through to grassroots supporters of Donald Trump at a time like this when things are chaotic in Washington and kind of bad for him in Washington.
Well, I mean, one of the gentlemen that I spoke to is just recently retired. He seems to think that a lot of this isn't Trump's fault, because he said, I wish they'd leave him alone to do his job. And there was, of course, the media was not spoken very highly of. Basically it boils down to they seem to have the impression that, that DC and the media and everybody else is kind of against him and not allowing him to do what he needs to do. Of course, that seems a little odd when you consider that most of what he's done and the problems that he's having, the reason why he's below 40% in polls are wounds that are self-inflicted. This morning is a perfect example with him undercutting his own Justice Department.
And then attacking Mark Halperin, his own Justice Department, which actually works for him.
And whose decision was done in consultation with the White House.
With him. It was his decision. And so now he's attacking people who work for him, his subordinates.
Yeah. Jay, what are the economic conditions in that county and of the people you talked to?
Well, the people that I spoke to, I went there early in the morning, so most of the people were there that were getting ready to go to work. A couple were retired. One couple that I spoke to, they're small business owners. And, so the economic conditions there aren't bad. It's just as well as anywhere else in the United States. So there wasn't any kind of, there wasn't any concern about jobs or anything like that. I think, again, it was one person I spoke to, just to give you an idea how detached they are. When I asked her what she thought about the Neil Gorsuch nomination, she said, I don't even know who that is. She said, speak to me in 4 years and I'll let you know how I think Trump did. Everybody, the overall theme, I think, was it's so soon, it's so early that we really can't, we can't grade him just yet.
All right, Jay Caruso, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Fascinating article, and look forward to having you back soon. That line right there is the disconnect. There are so many people, there's a small subset of Americans that watch cable news 24 hours a day, that are on Twitter, that are on Gauge, that follow it day in and day out like they follow a baseball team. There's so many Americans who say, like the lady told Jay, talk to me in 4 years, okay? Just relax. And I'm here, like, working and raising my kids. I'll talk to you in 4 years.
And I think they also watch a lot of the president's actions on foreign issues, on foreign policy issues, with that same kind of perspective that he's standing up and fighting up for America's interests, particularly on issues like NATO. The allies have to pay more,
right.
The Paris climate. I don't think they want to get into the weeds of it. They're looking at it from the position of America first, and I think he's delivering that to those voters in Georgia and elsewhere.
Yeah, Mark, the screaming headlines are, if you take all the, just look at the screaming headlines, Trump, pounds NATO, says pay your fair share. Trump tells London, no, don't get used to terror. We'll never get used to terror. And you can just go down the list. Trump calls federal judges out of touch and overly political.
Yeah, and I'll say again, the question to me is, does all that stuff help or hurt his chances of passing major legislation this year? Because the clock is ticking. Congress is back, but they're not going to be in very much this year. And this stuff, most members of Congress, Republicans, see this stuff as a distraction that hurts his prospects of passing health care, tax reform, not help.
Is that the scorecard? Is the scorecard?
I don't think it is.
Do you pass anything in Congress?
I think maybe it's not, which is a bizarre thing to say. But I'm coming to realize from stories like Jay's, from my own reporting, that for a lot of people, I'm not sure how many, the Trump presidency is a performance. It's a performance for them, and the performance is in some ways more important than the accomplishments or the policy. It's, do they feel invigorated by him and felt by him and heard by him? And that's a very different kind of politics than we've seen before in this country.
Donald Trump, his primary opponent in the Republican primary was a Bush. In the general election, it was a Clinton. For a lot of people across America, that wasn't even a close call. It was a break from politics as usual. So, well, anyway, tomorrow morning on Morning Joe, we're going to be talking to EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt following the president pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And on Wednesday, the Vice Chair of the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, that's one day ahead of Jim Comey's big testimony on Capitol Hill on Thursday, which will be the event most likely of the week. That does it for us this morning. Stephanie Rule picks up the coverage now.